It's time now for Harm Reduction, heard every Tuesday at 7 p.m. with Will Beaton, Cutting Edge Radio, where we'll ask the questions others don't want to ask. Now here's your host, Will Beaton.
Hello, everybody. It is I, Willard TeaBelly. Again, so happy to be chatting with you. Much has changed since I saw you last, since we talked. I was out in the wilderness, as you may have known if you've been listening to the last few episodes, and I've just finally returned from the wilderness back into society, back into civilization. And so for the next several months, I'll be taking over as main editor of the program for now. Your pal Cal, who'd been doing that job for the last 9 weeks or so, will still be around. He's in G-Funk, and he'll be touching in with us from time to time. We'll also be hearing from Tim, who is taking over as president of the Psychedelic Club of UND. Right about now, I would assume his first week of class at UND. I'm not sure. It's been a couple years since I've been a student now. I, however, am starting graduate school in Colorado. So you may have noticed the very interesting, slightly aggressive thumbnail I chose. If you're listening to this online on YouTube, if you're watching the video we've posted on the Sandbagger News YouTube channel, you might be wondering, why is there a picture of the Colorado flag with a marijuana leaf on it as the image icon for episode 37 of the Harm Reduction Report that you're hearing now? Well, before I get into it, I'd like to sort of share a few more thoughts, just wrapping up this wilderness theme we've been running on for a while. I've found a few more wilderness quotes, and I'm trying to reflect on this at this time because it'll be a while until I'm in the wilderness again. And so I was thinking about some quotes, and I found one here from Theodore Roosevelt, President of these United States, a resident one time of North Dakota, as most of us know. He said, "There is a delight in the hardy life of the open. There are no words that can tell the hidden spirit of the wilderness, that can reveal its mystery, its melancholy, and its charm. The nation behaves well if it treats the natural resources as assets which it must turn over to the next generation, increased and not impaired in value. Conservation means development just as much as it does protection." That's interesting and exciting. Thank you, Theodore Roosevelt. I like that whole concept of something which is going to be turned over, which we, whether we like it or not, are in possession of now, and which will be turned over to the next generation wholly alone once we have gone. I'm feeling how this could easily apply to many of the things we're talking about in regards to harm reduction. Imagine all of the young people, all of the people, period, in our country, in our community. These are people, assets, which we are leaving to the world to deal with themselves one day once we are gone. And so, in that same spirit, we need to treat our young people as these invaluable assets we must protect before we abandon. And there's another interesting word, abandon. Alan Watts talks about the Christian mystics using the word abandon, the abandonment to the divine grace, basically. To be abandoned is actually to be fully enwrapped in, which almost sounds like the opposite of being abandoned. I wonder if we are abandoning our people in the proper sense to themselves. It's natural. Parents will have to abandon their children. One day, the parents will die and be gone, and the children will be abandoned. That's sort of how it's supposed to work. So we have to accept the concept of abandonment in the right spirit, and when it's done in the right way, it, of course, is a very constructive thing. Margaret Murray said, "Wilderness itself is the basis of all our civilization. I wonder if we have enough reverence for life to concede to wilderness the right to live on." Live on, and I would say, live out of. They say we all want Canaan without the wilderness. We talk about the wilderness as if it is something absolutely not for human beings to live in at all. There's nothing for humans in a wilderness. We say this is a wilderness. There's nothing. Well, of course, we came out of the wilderness in the biblical story and in every kind of scientific, evolutionary, natural progression sense. We came out of this wilderness, not necessarily something put here from somewhere else that wasn't the wilderness. We came right out of this like we belonged there. And so, how do we consider that? How do I consider it? It's something I'm asking myself now. Here I am, back in civilization, out of the wilderness, from a place where my ancestors used to live to the place where my family live now, in civilization. What is there to be learned? Guess who said this? And this, our life exempt from public hunt, finds tongues in trees, books in running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything. One touch of nature makes the whole world kin. That's William Shakespeare. Wow, I could actually understand it. What a fun thing. So, I guess I've got to be finding my tongues in people's faces again, and my books in libraries, and my sermons on internet blogs these days, and good, hopefully, somewhere, now that I am back in civilization. Before I get into it, I don't necessarily want this to be a whole hour of me talking, so I would like to cut to a little song and finally try to wrap up this wilderness concept. I bet you I'll be coming back to it, but in smaller segments. So for those of you who've been sick of it, we'll move on now. But I will leave you with one more song. This again, like the one we did last week about the singing wilderness. These are the words of Sigurd Olsen, who's a nature writer who lived up in Ely, Minnesota, and who explored the Boundary Waters, Quetico in Canada and Minnesota, very much, and wrote books about it and stuff. Really cool, poetic sort of writer dude. He, I memorized a bunch of words, almost word for word. It's the chapter of his book, The Singing Wilderness, called The Stone Wall. And I set it to music, and I'm going to play it for you right now. And let's try to roll out of that with this feeling of assuredness that I won't keep bringing up this wilderness stuff, but also help me come up with the last stretch. How is this related to harm reduction? I'll listen to it again with you as I play it here, and maybe we'll come up with something. The first thing going into it, the only idea I have, how is this directly related to harm reduction? Well, it's called the stone wall. So it brings up the concept of the sandbag wall. There's a line there about going out to work on my wall, and it totally makes me think about sandbagging and the coming togetherness of our community back in G-Funk, who was able to do that so well. Come together no matter what the cost it is to us as individuals, when we know the cost to us as a community is worth more. It's called stoned. Maybe the word stone is in there, so maybe there's something to be said about the concept of getting stoned, but I don't think so. Perhaps all that is to say, my advice is don't take it too seriously, but maybe you'll enjoy this next 5 minutes, and we'll get back onto this concept of me being in the wilderness in a new state in Colorado. I'll try to compare Colorado and North Dakota. I'll try to bring up the fact that there is, well, we'll get there. Here's the song. Whenever life doesn't seem any fun anymore, I have an ineffable cure. I go out and work on my wall, dig rocks out of the turf and move them from where they've been resting for some 10,000 years or more to a place of my own choosing. Somehow, when I do this, the world moves off magically to where it belongs, and I take the helm no matter what the situation be. When I touch them, we seem to exchange little of my worries
Yes, I like stones. To me they are not dead or inert, but as alive as the crystals of which they are composed. Though they seem so unchangeable, I know that within them is a dynamic cosmos, each one with a character of its own, an indelible record of life on earth long ago. Well, not a stone in my walls got but a story to tell, not a one but brings back to me in a flash a vision of all the places I've been. See, this wall is a record of my travels and an album of all creation, each stone a separate page of the long story of the past. One section happens to be made of glacial boulders, such as granite and schist, red jasper veined with white quartz, quartz and greenstone, black basalt and more, grounded by the rivers, lakes, shores and the coasts of the Hudson Bay country. They were gripped by the glacial ice and dragged 1,000 miles from the north. And when the ice front retreated, the stones were dropped, could you believe it, as terminal moraine, right here on the hilltop where I live. But that was thousands of years ago, when the country was cold and devoid of life. Those rounded boulders had known the bitter years. They were round, they were here when the first lichens did grow, and the mosses that come with them to cover the scars of glaciation. They'd watched the slow formation of humus. Ooh, how did they do this? Just an inch each 1,000 years. And they felt at last the gripping roots of the tall red pines. They watched the passing of the woodland caribou and the indigenous tribes who'd been here a long, long time before the white men moved in just a couple centuries back, when for the first time scattered stones were moved and placed in great piles so the plow could go between them. Well, that's where I found most of mine, hidden in the red, yellow, gold of Chumac, birch, cherry life. And after all that waiting time, these ice-beaten things had finally come to life. So when I built a fireplace in my cabin wall, I knew it must be faithful to the Canadian shield. Yes, it must tell the story of the entire lake country of the north. So I built into it samples of all the native rock types from hundreds of miles around. Sections from the ridges, rivers, lake shores and cliffs, which bring back memories of our voyageurs who've explored. That fireplace is a bit of the wilderness, a symbol of the companionship I've experienced in many expeditions into the north. So when I kindle a fire there and see those rough familiar rocks, friends of the trail stand beside me and sing with me out of the past.
So perhaps we can let that stand just to say something of a celebration to SIG, but more specifically the act of coming together. You know, we talk about a sandbag wall a lot and how it's amazing how all these people show up and together build this wonderful thing that they could never do on their own. Well, his concept of this wall, I've visited this wall actually. I've seen this chimney in his cabin, and it's made of all these different kinds of stones, as the book says, from all different types, all different perspectives, if you will, on what it is to be a stone. He puts them all together and creates a wall, and the point was he was trying to make the most diverse wall he could, because he obviously that's preferable. So thank you, Sig, and thank you, everybody, for indulging me in a little song. Now I'd like to move on to another topic, and that is the fact that I have moved to Colorado, and this is really weird. It's strange. I'm starting grad school here, and I'll be here for 2 years. Next summer, I'll be back up in the wilderness, though. For now, I was faced with the intimidating proposition of renouncing all of my North Dakota statehoodness, residency. Basically, for this grad program, I thought I had to become an official resident of Colorado. You know, my parents still live in Grand Forks, and so that's my main mailing address. I got a North Dakota license and all that. But for this residency thing, I was going to have to get all different stuff because of how the tuition works. I needed to be a resident. And I was prepared to do this. I was ready to give up my North Dakota license plates on my car and my North Dakota driver's license. But as it turns out, fortunately, North Dakota is in this certain conference, a consortium of states that have some sort of arrangement with Colorado University system. So I'm in the Western States Division or something. It's got some acronym. And this is going to allow me not to change my North Dakota residency. So I am proud to continue to have a North Dakota driver's license in my pocket. And I love my North Dakota driving license plates on my car. It's fun to drive around. There are actually lots of North Dakotans in Colorado. I don't know if you are into college hockey, but you would know by attending any of those games in Colorado when North Dakota is being played against, that there's often more North Dakota fans in the stands than there are, say, University of Denver fans present. So there's a lot of North Dakotans here, not just hockey fans, but I see them around, and it's fun. It's nice to not be alone out here. But there are some pretty striking differences between the states. Not necessarily the people, but also the legislative mindset, the rules that the people of these states have made for themselves. Bringing it back to the thumbnail, if you're looking at that thinking, geez, he's got a North Dakota or a Colorado flag with a big marijuana leaf in the middle of it. That's the image right now associated with this 1 hour audio file on YouTube. Well, I didn't mean to give the impression, as some, I suppose, who have such images or stickers on their stuff, Colorado flag with marijuana leaf. It's actually kind of annoying. Back in North Dakota, whenever you mention Colorado, it's almost the first thing that someone says is, marijuana, you're going there for the marijuana? Or at least, if they don't accuse me of going there only for the marijuana, they say something like, oh, they've got marijuana there. And like, are you going to be okay with all the stoners there? Or something. Which is kind of a silly thing, because obviously the state has more going for it than marijuana has. I mean, much more. I love Colorado. For one thing, it's got lots and lots of natural resources here. From where I am in Fort Collins, I can go west, just above the Horsetooth Reservoir, and see the Rocky Mountains. An hour away from here is Rocky Mountain National Park, and the top of the most beautiful mountain I've ever been on. I've not been on that many mountains, so there's a lot of people here who've been on more mountains than I. But this one in Rocky Mountain National Park on the Trail Ridge Road is a very important place to me. In fact, it was the very first breath of fresh air I ever took in Colorado. On my first visit 4 years ago, I came with my father and my sister. We drove all the way down here. I forget what we were doing, but one thing, I was visiting campus 4 years ago here at Colorado State, and to check it out. And we stopped at the Rocky Mountain National Park, and my dad took a picture of me sitting on this very top of the cool trail, the highest point. They've got a little path people can walk out on, sit on this cliff. My dad took a picture of me, and then he made it a canvas print for me, and gave it to me, and I've had that on my wall for quite a while. Very nice of him, but this is a wonderful place. I go north or south from here, and there's rivers of all sorts of shapes, and I go east, and there is Nebraska and the great expanses of Midwest that I'm used to. And north of here is Wyoming, of course, and there's lots going on. So all that to say, I was tentative to put this image as a thumbnail because I don't want to give the impression that I am here for the marijuana. Certainly, I am not. I'm here to get a college education, and that was not available to me back home in North Dakota. I also don't want to give the impression that I am an out-of-stater who's come to Colorado and now is using the Colorado flag, almost like defacing the Colorado flag with a pot leaf as some sort of throwaway, like, yeah, pot's great or something, and I'm being disrespectful to the flag of Colorado in any sense. I also am a little skeptical or anxious that I might give that impression. So, all that to explain, well, why did I make it the thumbnail still? Simply so we could have this conversation. So I could bring up the fact that it's almost kind of not that cool when you see marijuana flags on people, marijuana images like overlaid on the Colorado flag or anywhere else, really. For the point of being disrespectful, that would never be something that someone wants to be. But I got the thumbnail I got simply to get your attention, and let's talk about it now. Something I very much am interested in touching on repeatedly over the next few weeks is the concept that marijuana, recreationally and medically, is legal in this state. And that's significant to us on the Harm Reduction Report because North Dakota this November is going to vote on recreational marijuana. Is this something we are going to allow people in our state the option of purchasing? So it's on our November ballot now. As we talked about before, recreational marijuana, they had to collect a bunch of signatures for a petition, and now it will be on the ballot in November in North Dakota. And I don't know if I can vote on it. I need to ask because I just registered to vote here in Colorado. This is something I got to figure out. If anyone can help me with it, please send me a message. How do I vote from afar? More people should know how to do it, I guess. I wish I knew right offhand, but I'll look it up. But it's really important that before we vote on this in North Dakota, we think very deeply about the evidence and the facts, and we listen to the stories of other states who for many years now have had recreational marijuana legal. Colorado is the first to legalize marijuana, and they have the most stuff figured out already. Other states legalized it earlier, not before Colorado, but have also had several years where it's been legal now, like Washington, Oregon. Almost half the states in our country now, maybe more, I should have that exact number on hand too, have legalized some form of marijuana. I'm pretty sure more, actually. North Dakota, as you know, passed medical marijuana 2 years ago. However, the very interesting, unfortunate fact is that our legislature has not implemented it yet. So, though for almost 2 years now, the measure has been passed, North Dakotans want medical marijuana in the state, there has still not been a single patient in the state to receive the medication they need. So that's unfortunate, and of course, the one problem is it's shaking the trust in people, and I think it's going to change how recreationally it's going to be voted on. At least my impression are many people who, when they consider the fact that legislators drag their feet or whatever it is, whatever's happened, to prevent medical from taking place the way we were promised it would, this might encourage people to vote yes on recreational simply because for all those patients who are in need of medical marijuana immediately, giving them the option to purchase recreational marijuana puts the control back in their hands. I just watched this remarkable TED Talk that I might play the beginning of... Yes, I think I will. I'm going to play the beginning of this TED Talk here, and then, but first I'll just do my best to explain where he goes from the beginning. It's a doctor who wanted to learn more about medical marijuana and what it's the process by which you obtain it and what you learn in that process as a patient. So he got himself a medical marijuana prescription and went to a few dispensaries and did some research, and mainly was trying to ask these people how much medical information did they have, because he describes this story.
I would like to tell you about the most embarrassing thing that has ever happened to me in my years of working as a palliative care physician. This happened a couple of years ago. I was asked as a consultant to see a woman in her 70s, retired English professor, who had pancreatic cancer. I was asked to see her because she had pain, nausea, vomiting. When I went to see her, we talked about those symptoms, and in the course of that consultation, she asked me whether I thought that medical marijuana might help her. I thought back to everything that I had learned in medical school about medical marijuana, which didn't take very long because I had learned absolutely nothing. And so I told her that as far as I knew, medical marijuana had no benefits whatsoever. And she smiled and nodded and reached into the handbag next to the bed and pulled out a stack of about a dozen randomized controlled trials showing that medical marijuana has benefits for symptoms like nausea and pain and anxiety. She handed me those articles and said, maybe you should read these before offering an opinion, doctor. So I did. That night, I read all of those articles and found a bunch more. When I came to see her the next morning, I had to admit that it looks like there is some evidence that marijuana can offer medical benefits. And I suggested that if she really was interested, she should try it. You know what she said? This 73-year-old retired English professor? She said, I did try it about 6 months ago. It was amazing. I've been using it every day since. It's the best drug I've discovered. I don't know why it took me 73 years to discover this stuff. It's amazing. That was the moment at which I realized I needed to learn something about medical marijuana because what I was prepared for in medical school bore no relationship to reality.
The doctor goes on to explain how what he realized was these patients, when they are able to get their hands on medical marijuana, for many of them, they're not expecting a cure-all thing. They're not expecting to cure their cancer. But they know that it helps them in certain ways once they've tried it. And they are able to control for themselves. He says, when you have a chronic illness, the worst part about it is your loss of control. There's nothing you can do. You are going to feel this horrible pain, or you are not going to be able to do the things you normally love to do and want to do. You have no control, and that's the most helpless feeling, the most helpless thing about having a chronic illness, such as terminal cancer in this case. And so by giving the patient access to the option of using this as a medicine for their own self, the most rewarding thing he found in doing so was giving them that sense of power. And the woman in the story, she says, I have control over my illness now. I'm not going to beat it necessarily, but I am in control of how I live my life and how I live with this illness. And for many with a chronic illness, that means a lot. And he also does a really good job to remind us that all of us will experience a chronic illness unless we just drop dead someday. We will all fall apart slowly. And he says it in sort of a weird way, but he's right, of course, and we know this, but consider that when you wonder if someday you may want the option of experiencing such a medication. We may not be, if your back was up against the wall and nothing you tried worked, as was true with this woman, you may yourself want this. And it's especially true and clear when a person's child is suffering. And I remember when medical was voted on 2 years ago in North Dakota, there were lots of images on Facebook of people's kids, young kids, suffering from horrible epileptic seizures and other chronic pains, and then having illegal marijuana administered to them, and watching the amazing transformation, and how in this case, in the case you're looking at, the story of the little boy whose seizures stopped, or the woman in this story from California who was able to control her illness, you watch that happen, you think, wow, it's been 2 years and that little boy has still not been allowed, his parents have not been allowed to get this medication for him, even though a doctor, any doctor, real doctors, would tell them that he deserves the medication, and it is legal in our state now. Still, this little boy has not been able to legally medicate himself. And there's probably many people like that in our home state. This is a topic we will come back to lots on the show, and one we've hit already. It's about freedom. What you're voting on in North Dakota in November is not a life choice. I'm going to go smoke recreational marijuana every day, or I support people abusing marijuana or something. No, you're supporting freedom. You're giving consenting adults the option of using this how they see fit as their lives change and as they develop as human beings. For the rest of this hour, I would like to talk about a different angle, a different approach, but something that has struck me as incredibly interesting. So when I was going to UND, that was right when the big budget cuts were happening. And I was a student when we cut all the big sports teams like we did. We lost the women's hockey team, and we lost all these other teams. We lost lots of programs. We lost the Student Television Center. We lost all kinds of stuff. I think still there's a hiring freeze, and they can't pay their graduate students, and all this horrible stuff, as we all know, has been going on in North Dakota from the budget cuts. Well, what is something our state could do to have a little more money in the bank? One amazing answer, of course, is taxing marijuana. And so here I am in Colorado, a state that has been taxing marijuana for many years now. And I've finally done some research to find out where all this money goes. I'm looking at a receipt in front of me now. A $60 purchase at the local Fort Collins recreational marijuana dispensary, the cannabis dispensary. And for $60, this person purchased 1/8 of an ounce of marijuana. That is 3.5 grams of marijuana for $60, which I'll tell you is the going price on the street in North Dakota for 1/8. And but the huge, amazing difference is I'm looking at this receipt, and 7 of those $60 are directly applied to the marijuana tax. There's a little bit of other sales tax on there too, but more than $7, almost $8 of that 60 is not going to your drug dealer and to the people he has to pay to get his product, but going to the state marijuana tax fund of Colorado. And so what is that? I'm going to look into it right now. Here's this wonderful graphic with all the appropriate information from the year 2017 in Colorado. What was all the marijuana tax used for, and how much did they really collect? Well, you would be quite... I'm amazed. Here's what I just learned. So there's 2 different taxes on marijuana. There's tax on the wholesale product, and there's a retail tax when you're buying it from a dispensary too. And of this amount, just from the year 2017, it breaks down in a few different ways. First, there's a 2.9 sales tax on medical marijuana. That, in 1 year, earned the state of Colorado nearly $41 million. Then there's the 15% special sales tax on marijuana, which people buying from the dispensary, that's $7 of your $60 purchase of an eighth ounce of ganj, that racked up $98 million for the state of Colorado in 1 year. And the excise tax on the wholesale marijuana earned the state another nearly $72 million in taxes. All this money is put into specific funds that the people of Colorado voted on. And here's some of the things that this money is used for. Let's see. Many millions of dollars goes to construction of schools. And I'll look more specifically at the school page. I got the whole Department of Education here. I'll break down all the money that the schools get. So I'll skip that for now. Aside from the schools, what they get, there is $32 million of this tax money going to the Department of Human Services to fund specific programs on substance abuse prevention, on mental health treatment, and on youth prevention and treatment services. So imagine that much money going to counteract some of the worries that people assumed might occur more because this is legal. As it is, and I'll get into some of those statistics, crime and mental derangement and problems have actually not increased because of marijuana in Colorado. And perhaps in part that's because $32 million now of the new the Human Services Department is to combat those things. And that's straight from the taxes earned by this thing. But that's not all. Another $16.5 million is going to construction in local communities that local communities vote on for affordable housing, local construction projects, local government, retail, impact grant programs. So programs that are looking at the marijuana impact. $16.5 million are funding these projects to keep an eye on how marijuana is changing, the impact changes over time. $2.7 million straight from the marijuana tax fund of 2017 in Colorado went directly to law enforcement and public safety. And the point of that fund is to increase programming for marijuana-impaired driving prevention. So the police have been given nearly $3 million in 1 year to help combat things like DUIs on marijuana, which also have not increased according to the stats I've read. Another $6 million goes to local law enforcement to enforce the prohibition against illegal markets. So this is wonderful. Of course, there's still going to be illegal markets in Colorado and in other states that legalize marijuana. Those illegal markets will be much smaller. But some of the marijuana taxes raised in Colorado have gone straight to law enforcement to make sure that the illegal markets still are illegal and not cool. Let me jump to the schools now. The money that goes to the schools, where does it go? Well. This is just the money that goes to the schools. Check it out. In 2015-16, the marijuana tax revenue that went straight to the Department of Education was $86 million. The next year, the Department of Education got $54 million. And in 2017-2018, the total marijuana tax revenue for the Department of Education was $90 million. Now, the education website here reminds you that Colorado's a big state, and they have tons of students. Actually, I just learned that the public school system of Denver owns the most real estate in the city of Denver because they have so many schools. So there's a lot of kids in Colorado going to school that the Department of Education worries for. So $90 million is actually only 1.5% of the state's K-12 education budget, which is itself $5.6 billion. Huge. I don't know offhand what the size of the budget of the North Dakota Department of Education is, but I know for a fact that it could use more money. Obviously, it could always use more money. but many programs that were cut and services that were cut while I was a student of North Dakota university system. I wonder how many of those things would not have been cut had the state legislator had access to an additional source of marijuana taxes. How is this money? $90 million went to the Department of Education last year. I just got to show you. It's so cool what it goes to. The Department of Education gets tax money for the School Health Professional Grant Program, which addresses behavioral health issues in school. Marijuana taxes fund a grant program that helps schools and school districts set up initiatives to reduce the frequency of bullying. Marijuana taxes support grants to fund dropout prevention programs. And marijuana taxes fund early literacy grants to ensure reading is embedded in the K through 3rd grade curriculum. That is all so cool. Compare that, if you will, to the following statistics I will show you in the audio from this Washington Post video about the marijuana taxes in Colorado.
The Tax Foundation projected that the federal government and states where recreational marijuana is not legal are losing out on $28 billion per year. Marijuana prohibition costs the U.S. $465 million per year to arrest people for marijuana possession, and $3.6 billion per year to enforce marijuana laws. Since marijuana legalization in Colorado, there has not been an increase in teens smoking pot. Since legalization in Colorado, fatal and injury crashes attributed to DUI are down from before legalization. Marijuana arrest rates tumbled in Washington and Colorado from 2008 to 2014, dropping by 90% in Washington and 60% in Colorado.
So think about how much money is being saved by these states. Did you hear that? In Washington, 90% of all the arrests they had to make for marijuana while this was illegal have gone down. That tells me probably that the illegal markets have diminished in size and in scope. And as they said, how much money is wasted? Okay, I can think of dozens of people I know from Grand Forks who have been arrested for marijuana. Many of them spent an entire weekend in jail simply for small-time possession, smoking behind their dorm at UND. College student goes to jail for an entire weekend because it happened to be Friday night that they got picked up. So this is a very common story in Grand Forks. You're arrested on Friday night, you probably spend the whole weekend in jail until the judge will come talk to you on Monday. And the what that costs to keep you there, and what that costs, wastes the officer's time in throwing you down there, that costs a lot of money to do that. I won't say waste time, I mean, but the time that officers have to spend to arrest you and put you in jail for a whole weekend is extreme. And instead, you could have taxed those students, those people who were arrested. Instead of costing you tons and tons of money, they would have earned you lots of money. And so from a strictly economic standpoint, it should be something that North Dakotans are extremely interested in. And there could be a massive industry about this. In the same way, our university presidents and our Congress people in North Dakota brag about having strong industry in one field or another, they could brag about having marijuana taxes that are funding their state instead of costing them money. This wouldn't work, or this argument wouldn't apply if there was going to be the additional cost of, creating more people addicted to drugs who need support from the state. That would be a huge cost. But as we know, all these states that have legalized this have seen decreases in the amount of problems they have. I can think of dozens and dozens of stories, people in North Dakota and elsewhere, who have used marijuana to stop their other addictions. They use it to treat their illnesses, and they have to purchase less medication that has harmful side effects for them. But they also, some of them, I know people who have been addicted to alcohol have treated their alcoholism with marijuana. I know people who have been addicted to opioids in North Dakota who have treated their addiction with marijuana. Imagine that. The amount of resources that people with chronic illnesses and addictions have to take from the state is significant. But if that can be decreased by giving people access to a medication that they're happy to pay taxes for, and you can use that tax money to fund further prevention abuse problems, this is just a win-win-win. And that's, again, not to say somebody might at that moment pick out a story of, one time marijuana was bad for one person. Well, there's tons of stories where a certain medication is not right for someone at a certain time, and many stories of people misusing medications and substances to have extreme detrimental effect on the individual. But the fact is, we have lots and lots of data now. There is absolutely no saying the jury is not in on it yet. There's enough evidence. If we're going to give it a try, if we're going to trust North Dakotans enough with this power in their hands of the option to purchase marijuana in a medicinal or recreational or what have you sense, it's time to make that decision. Either we are truly that afraid of ourselves and that afraid, unwilling to trust our own citizens with such a power, with such a freedom, a privilege, one might say a right, then we got to just be clear about it now. But the fact is, we ought to trust ourselves with this power. We ought to trust our kids. We owe it to our kids to give this a try, because it's getting worse all across the country. Problems with opioids in our own hometown, more people still dying. We've been talking about certain prohibition-related solutions for many, many, many years, and it has not worked. It has been nearly 100 years since we decided to prohibit the possession, sale, existence of alcohol in this country. And that was the lesson. That's the lesson we had. It didn't work, right? Prohibition didn't work at all. The worst part of prohibition, in my opinion, is how it put the police in a completely unfair position of having to enforce an absolutely unenforceable law. And it resulted in a lot of corruption too, unfortunately. But you totally see why when you think about it, how impossible that was. And the ones who were sincerely trying to uphold the laws given to them not by the people but by the politicians, they were the most unfortunate of the bunch, because they had to do something impossible. They had to be like, well, as Alan Watts just sort of half-jokingly says, they had to be like uniformed ministers, armed ministers, people who are supposed to be members of the state, protecting the constitution of the state, ending up enforcing moral values, which the state really has no business meddling in. When these things are performed by consenting adults, and they don't harm anyone else, then it's just a strange matter of freedom we're talking about. What else are you going to prevent me from making my own humble decision to influence my own mindset or spirituality, if this is not where we draw the line? If we draw the line beyond this, then it's getting scary on where the line may actually be drawn. I'm thinking specifically of the situations of a friend of mine, college student at UND, arrested for smoking a joint and sent to jail for an entire weekend. This is harmful. The decision to jail this student, North Dakota college student trying to better himself and make his state a better place, instead of throwing him in jail for a whole weekend, eating up a bunch of the taxpayers' dime, if he would have been allowed to make this choice, if we would have trusted him to make this choice, and he would have continued his evening the way he imagined and gone safely to bed as he'd planned, the state would be in a much better situation financially and morally. Like they would sleep. The state could sleep a little better knowing they didn't have to micromanage such minute details of its operation as to enforce so impossibly and with such expense the minute details of one person's evening plans. And especially, instead of doing all that, had they instead simply taxed the young man for the marijuana he had purchased, that would have prevented the funding of a criminal operation. It would have supported marijuana tax laws in the local and state community that could have done things like funded abuse prevention programs and all this other stuff that, say Colorado is doing with their tax money. Think about the difference. If I am a North Dakota resident and I decide for myself, for whatever reason, maybe I'm trying to prevent myself from drinking this weekend. Maybe I have a chronic illness and I can't take care of my kids properly unless I take care of my pain somehow. Maybe any number of reasons at all, I want to decide to smoke marijuana or to ingest cannabis. What do? Well, I have to ask somebody to break the law. First thing I have to do, I have to ask another North Dakotan to put themselves in a very dangerous situation, and one that could possibly have a big expense put on the state if this person actually is caught. If I or anyone I'm dealing with is arrested for this, imagine the expense I just impressed upon the state. Whereas I'm perfectly willing to go to a store and pay for this. I mean, what if I were even willing to have pay a psychiatrist to sit with me in a perfectly safe, impossible to harm anyone else environment? Even this is not allowed, and both the psychiatrist and I would go to jail for a weekend if someone called the cops. No good. Well, if you're a college student and you decide to make this decision, you're going to have to start asking around, and as weird as it is, if you don't have those friends, so you don't have those connections off the bat, one amazing way is to look up the Grand Forks Herald and find out some of the kids who've died in recent years and figure out who their friends were and maybe go ask them, as wonky as that sounds. And as soon as you do this, you know for a fact that you're putting yourself in danger, because even if the kids who've died overdosed on fentanyl thought they were taking MDMA or just some opiates, you're dealing with people and with a system that can go horribly, horribly wrong with no warning. You're dealing with an underground market that is not held accountable to anyone other than the cops. But the cops cannot possibly get everyone. They cannot. No matter how excited you might feel listening to some of our authorities who brag about how no one is safe, none of these drug dealers are safe, and we're going to catch them all. You ain't Ash Ketchum. You're not going to catch them all. And now I've delved into something that could endanger me, my people I'm dealing with, my friends, my family. There's going to be a cost put on the state if I am caught. This is just a completely harmful situation. Whereas a person, for a similar or any of the other reasons why you might decide to want to try marijuana, living in Colorado, simply walks down to the store where the local community has voted and approved to have a local store in the state that's legalized medical and recreational marijuana. You walk in, you swipe your ID in a very fancy machine that's impossible to fake. At least it seems to me. I have no idea. I mean, how easy is it for young people to get a fake ID and go drinking underage? It's easier than you think. Yeah, easier than you think. Well, when you walk into the marijuana store here in Fort Collins, at least, you swipe your ID in this very sophisticated machine that scans your card and puts your age up on a big screen, and there's no way of faking it. It happens to look just like you or something. I can't imagine how you'd make a fake ID like that. Maybe you still can. Probably it's a lot harder to fake that stuff. Any college student can build a fake ID and walk into a bar with it. Say you're a Colorado resident, you've made this decision for yourself, you've walked into your community-approved dispensary, you've swiped your ID to verify your identity, ensure that you're in accordance with the law, and thereby protect the local community business you're trying to support from unfair liability. And now you've walked into the back room where you're suddenly in the hands of professionals who, before you ever make a purchase, will give you free medical advice in a one-on-one setting. Often, these people behind the counter are able to tell you more about what the different strains and of medicinal properties, all the marijuana, whether it's behind the medical counter or the recreational counter, it's all usually the same stuff. Often the stuff behind the medical counter is just a little more strong. All of it has medicinal uses, of course, and they're the same medicinal uses. These people will give you straight up medical advice to an extent that your doctor can't about marijuana, but often about other things too. And they're not pressuring you to make a purchase either. They're honestly there to help you. It's a community supported help center where you can get real information about what you're ingesting. I think a lot of people who have never had friends who smoke marijuana, or at least who think they've never had friends who smoke marijuana, and who have never been to a marijuana store, assume that there's like some weird stoner culture happening, and that it's like some bougie sort of upscale weird thing. Or maybe people assume that it's the opposite, that it's some like grungy, horrible den of thieves where you're in position to pick up a disease off the floor or something as you walk through. Actually, most of these places are staffed by people who live in that community, who are very excited for the opportunity to bring medication to people, whether they're walking in with a medical card or not. Everyone who buys marijuana, I mean, unless you're straight up buying it for kicks, I mean, you can buy it for whatever reason. But, I mean, most everyone I know who buys marijuana in the stores here is doing so mindfully and intentionally, not simply to go home and get drunk, as is the mission often when you go to the liquor store and pick up some booze for your friend's party. Instead, you're walking out of there with a very intentional purpose, and your purchase is made knowing that you're going to better your own life, and you're going to be able to use this thing to allow you to live a better life, a more healthy life for you and the community. And then you're walking out of there knowing how your tax dollars are going to support even more prevention and abuse outreach treatment things. And this is all very important. This is something I'm going to keep talking about on the show until November comes when we vote on this in North Dakota. So we'll see how it plays out. I'll be reporting from here, from Colorado. But as always, I'm still working on the backlog, so we're going to have the rest of our episodes up on the Sandbagger News YouTube channel. But you can hear us on KEQQ 88.3 FM in Grand Forks, good old G-Funk. Thank you, Noah. Thank you, Cal. Thank you, everybody. Sandbag on.